Hello, I'm Andy and welcome to my kitchen where my fz1 is currently in bits. This bike, I've had Japanese bikes for nearly 40 years and I've never had any issues with engines, gearboxes or anything. They've always been dead reliable, but even little issues I've not really had a lot. This fz1 is destroying my faith in Japanese bikes. It's driving me crackers because every time I fix something, there's something else needing fixed. But this is a problem I've had with the bike since I got it, and it was one of those things I've just lived with it because I couldn't be bothered really digging into it too much. But the other night there, I just happened to Google or search on YouTube for cold start issues on an fz1, and there was a guy who had made a video, but all he was showing you really was a parts fiche, showing you which part was responsible for the problem and explaining how to fix it. So I thought I would just add this as a wee supplement to his video and show you physically how to fix it. So the problem is when you start the bike when it's cold, instead of it ticking over at a higher tick over speed, sort of 2000 revs or whatever, I've actually got an R1 with the same engine as this, or very much the same engine. And what happens when you start it when it's cold is it starts off at sort of 2000 and it just gradually works its way down to sort of 1200 or whatever it's set at when it's warmed up a bit. This bike never did that. What it's done since day one is it sort of splutters into life. Now, I bought this as a bit of a project, I have to be honest and say that. I got it cheap. There was a lot of good stuff on it. You know, somebody spent a lot of money on the bike and a lot of time. It's got a Power Commander 5 there. It's got a quick shifter. It's got quite a lot of things done to it that are positive upgrades, if you like. But unfortunately, there was a lot of neglected maintenance, if you like. There's a lot of things it needed. One of those was the stator. Now, that I'm not making a video on that because it's already done now, and there's loads of videos out there showing you how to change the stator. It's actually quite an easy job. On earlier versions of this engine, the generator is on the end of the crankshaft here, and that's usually just a kind of big round casing at the end here. For whatever reason, to make the engine narrower, well, it doesn't really make it narrower, it's just moved it from there to there. Still sticks out, but you basically got one housing with the starter motor at the back of it and the generator at the front. But what they did was they glued the magnets for the generator onto the inside of the drum, and what happens over time is the magnets let go, the glue sort of perishes over time, the magnets end up getting chewed up. Best case scenario, you have no charging system on your bike and you're stuck at the side of the road with a flat battery. But the worst case scenario is you get bits of chewed up magnet getting circulated around your engine. There's a massive hole above the crankshaft, basically where the generator sits. So any pieces of magnet that come through that are just going to drop down this hole, which is a substantial sized hole, straight onto your crankshaft, into your sump, circulated round. Carnage, not good. Stupid thing. Don't know why they designed it that way, but what annoys me a bit is that Yamaha never did this as a recall, even although they must be aware of the fact that this is quite a common failure. It's never been a recall, so it's definitely worth doing. I got the stator and the gasket for 100 quid on eBay, fitted straight in, no problems. Probably took me 15 minutes to do it, so it's not a hard job. As I say, there's loads of videos online, but anyway, I'm going off topic a bit. The issue that I'm trying to sort now is the cold start system. So let me explain roughly what's going on here. What happens is, let me just put these screws somewhere. Now I'll show you the screws first of all, because this was another drama trying to get the screws out. And yes, I know it's GIS screws before anybody says that, but I used a GIS screwdriver, Japanese industry standard they call it, and this one would not come out. I had to cut a slot in it, as you can probably see, and use a flat blade to actually get the thing out. One of them came out no bother, the other one was a nightmare, so they will not be going back in. I found a couple of Allen keys, or Allen bolts I should say, that are the same thread and about the same length, so they are going to go in instead, and they will hopefully come out much easier if I ever have to do this again. So the dismantling process is quite simple, and again, the other chap that's put his video online explains in detail how to take it apart, but taking it apart is quite easy. The plastic cover for the front of the tank comes off first. That reveals the bolts that actually hold the tank on, which are these two here, one on either side of the frame, and then one that goes right through the middle here. While it's still attached with this back bolt, you can lift the tank up, so you can basically swing it up backwards, and underneath there are connections for the fuel pump, the fuel sender, you know, the thing that tells you how much petrol you've got, and the actual petrol pipe itself. This pulls off, but what happens is this wee clip bit is on like that. When it's on in place, it kind of clips it in and holds it in. So you just push this clip backwards like that. That reveals these two little grey tangs on either side. And you need either a pair of thin pliers or just really strong finger and thumb. And when you push them together, you'll see that, basically you can probably see that wee bit moving in and out. That is essentially what lets this go of the bottom of the petrol pipe. And don't worry about the petrol flooding out, because it doesn't. It's a pressurised system. It'll only come out when the pump's running. So you'll get a couple of drips, but you'll not get a flood of petrol or anything like that. So you can pull this straight off. Then remove the bolt that holds the tank on at the back, and the whole tank will just lift off. There's a couple of breather pipes as well, I should have mentioned too. So there's two pipes. Obviously one's for a fuel overflow and the other one's just to let water out that manages to get past the seal on the petrol filler. Anyway, once you've got to that point, you're then left with the airbox, which is sitting on top here. There's a bunch of screws all around the airbox. I'll show you that. The top of it is there. So that obviously, this piece sits on top of the throttle bodies. The air filter sits in here. This has been modified. As I said, there's a few things that have been done to this bike. Normally the hole in the front of this airbox is just a wee small hole, but this is quite a common modification that I've seen, where people cut this hole a lot bigger to obviously let more air in. This bike doesn't have ram air like the R1, so the only air it's getting is coming in sort of under atmospheric pressure, if you like. It's not getting blown in under any, with any force. So obviously you want the hole as big as you possibly can to get as much air in, and whether it helps or not, I don't know. The top of this sits on there like that, and there's whatever, I've not counted them, but there's about 10 screws, just Phillips head screws all the way around, and then there's one down the hole in the middle there, so don't forget that one or you'll not get the thing off. Then you unplug the air temperature sensor, which is this wee top plug here, just a wee electrical pin connector, and then there's two air breather pipes, one on the back here and one at the front underneath. So they end up being, there is one of them, and there's the other one, that's the one that goes underneath, and this is your connector for the temperature sensor. So you disconnect all those, pull the top of the airbox off, and then you're left with Allen bolts that screw, which is a much better system to be fair. Allen bolts that screw the bottom half of the airbox onto the throttle bodies. There's 6 of them, 3 on each half if you like. They're quite easy to get out, and that then makes the whole airbox loose, and you just pull it off. Much better than trying to mess about underneath. A lot of bikes I've worked on in the past, it's a Jubilee clip type thing that holds a sort of rubber boot onto the top of the throttle body or the carburetor or whatever, and trying to get in through the sides of the frame, and screwdrivers, and nightmare. Anyway, that gets you access to the 2 screws, one of which is the chewed up one down there, 2 Phillips head screws or 2 GIS screws that hold this little thing into position. So basically where this sits, if I can show you with one hand, is like this. You can see the 2 holes there obviously lining up with the 2 holes in that casting there at the back of the throttle body. That's where your 2 screws go. You take them out. If you can have as much fun as me, I had to use the angle grinder basically. I obviously covered, just before Andy says anything, covered everything with a sheet, so there was no sparks going anywhere near the petrol pipe or anything else. I just basically covered everything except the screw that I was trying to sort of remove, so I cut a slot into it and got it out, but hopefully yours will come out easier. But why they never used bolts, I don't know. As I say, I'm replacing them with Allen bolts just to make it easier the next time. Once you've got that loose, you don't need to remove these. This is a water inlet and outlet, so basically how this works, it's not electronic. A lot of fuel injected engines would use electronics to sort of reset the throttle speed, the tickover speed, so they would have like a little stepper motor that would open the throttles or close them, and it would all be controlled by the ECU. This is a much simpler system. It's just essentially like an old-fashioned automatic choke, if you're old enough to remember them. All it is a wax chamber. The wax heats up, and as it heats up due to the coolant going through it. So when the coolant's cold, the wax contracts. When the coolant heats up, the wax expands. And basically what happens is there's a little plunger on the other end of this. It's very difficult to actually see the end of it, but if you sort of spin it around. You don't need to disconnect the water pipes, you just sort of pull this around so you've got access to it. When I pulled this off, it was solid. Now, if I push that in and out with my thumb, I don't know if you can see that, but that moves in and out freely, which is obviously what it's supposed to do. When it's in, that's when the tick over speed is higher, and when it's out, that's when the tick over speed is lower. So if it's jammed in the out position, that would explain why your tick over is too low, basically, when it's cold. But the bike will probably run fine when it's warmed up. The other end of that, incidentally, there is a wee adjuster there. I don't know if you can see that just at the end there, when my middle finger's pointing to. That's the cold idle adjuster. So all that does is it opens, basically pushes against that throttle plate. If I open and close the throttle, you can see the plate moving in there. And when that moves in and out, the stop, the end position is adjusted by this wee wheel at the side here. So that's your basically your idle speed adjuster. But adjusting that won't do any good for the cold idle, if you know what I mean. If you turn that up too high, in other words, it will idle high all the time. The idea of this is you set the idle speed when the engine's warmed up, and you obviously use this to get it to sound around about 1200 revs or something. Wherever it's kind of happy, I think it's normally about 11 or 1200 revs for a 4-cylinder motorbike. I've not actually checked the specs on this bike, to be quite honest, but that's what they usually are. But the cold idle speed is controlled by this plunger. So if the plunger's stuck, it'll always tick over, and because the engine's cold and everything's tight and the oil's thick and all the rest of it, it obviously will struggle to even get to 1200 revs when it's cold. So, which is why you need to sort of nurse it into life. But as I say, once it's fixed, so all I did to free this off, as I say, took those 2 screws out, then you just spin it around far enough to get into that, get a pair of mole grips, grab onto the end of it, don't go too far along it because you don't want to scrape it or damage the bit that actually goes in and out the plunger. If you scrape it, it obviously might end up, there'll be a seal in there to keep the wax in, so you don't want to damage the metal part that goes into the seal. But just if you grab the last sort of 3 or 4 mil of it with a set of mole grips, pull it in and out a few times, squirt it with some WD-40, which is what I've done. That's been my best friend, that stuff over there. Now it moves in and out, as I say, just with finger pressure. So it's fixed, and then obviously refitting it is just the reverse of taking it apart. Screws go in there, airbox goes back on, and eventually the tank will go back on. Unfortunately, it's not as simple as that for me right now, because this bike, like I say, is just fighting me every step of the way. It had an oil leak, which I fixed. It had a water leak coming from a pipe, which I fixed. And I'm now finding there's another water leak, which is why this blue roll is sitting here. And if you notice, that's covered in coolant. Well, I say covered, but there's a weep coming from somewhere. It appears to be coming from the thermostat housing, but I'm not entirely sure. I've tried tightening up the bolts around about it, the Jubilee clips on the pipes that go into it, but it still seems that this is wet, so I don't know. I'm getting pretty fed up with it, quite honestly. But I won't use it over the winter anyway. But it's just, it's annoying when you feel like you're not getting anywhere. But the bike will be fine one day, I'm quite sure, and it will be great fun. But as it stands right at the moment, it's just pissing me off. But anyway, that's one less thing to fix. So there you go. If you've got a cold start problem, that's how to sort it. Hope that's helped somebody. Thanks very much for watching.